Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next session, where we're going to be talking about a topic that some of us love to hate, some of us hate to love, but we all need, and that is money. Because there's something very odd about what's going on with feminism today. In lots of areas of our life, women have been getting more and more powerful, making real strides in terms of how they take control of the workplace, the wider public sphere, their own homes, their houses, etc., etc. But when it comes to money, there's something of a big lag. Very strange, very important, very challenging for all of us. And we have a great panel of people to talk about this. We have next to me Paula Polito, who's Global Client Strategy Officer at UBS, who's going to be talking to us about how women handle their money. We've got Laura Wasser, who is a family law attorney in Hollywood, who's been handling the divorces of people like Angelina Jolie. And we have Carmen Rita Wong, who's a CEO founder of Malecon Productions, a behavioral economist, and somebody who's been a financial journalist for years. But I'd like to start with you, Paula, because you've been doing a study recently at UBS, which looks at what women are actually doing with their money. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, this is an age-old problem. We've been talking about women abdicating their financial futures for so long, and I actually think it's time to really understand the why. And there's a couple of things that I think are very important. There are two large trends that are happening for women. One is, we all know women are living longer, and they're outliving their spouse. And the second thing is divorce rates are on the rise, and Laura can talk about that in spades. And
it's what makes her money.
And actually, the graying divorce population, women 50 and older, that's on the rise. And so when you think about it, these two trends are affecting 8 out of 10 women will wind up being alone and financially need a financial wherewithal to help themselves, 8 out of 10 women.
So all of you in the audience, look around your row, and you can work out that 8 out of 10 of you are going to be on your own at some point.
So the truth is that you have this trend, right?
You can try and work out who's not going to be on their own. They're in the minority.
We faced this trend, and we started to interview women that were widowed and divorced. And we said, what would you do differently? And 60% of the women said, we wish we would have done something differently while we were married. We should have taken more control. We should have empowered ourselves more. We should have educated ourselves more. And basically, 98% of widows and divorcees said, I want to give advice to other women because they need to hear. We need to create a community. So that was the widows. On the divorce side, 60% of women are, just saying, I wish I would have done something differently again. And then we interviewed married women, which was absolutely fascinating. And we said, why do you continue to abdicate? Because almost 60% of women abdicate. So this notion of, I wish I did something different, and trying to get people to actually do more and stop abdicating. Now, what I find really interesting, Jillian, is that there are a few reasons why women abdicate. One is historical, second is societal, and 3 is they just don't have the confidence or the competence, unless they actually don't believe they do, and they actually do.
Right.
But I think the historical piece is interesting because if you look back 60 years since women have really made progress in terms of enabling themselves when it comes to financial well-being, I remember my mother having to have my father sign to get a line of credit when she was doing some real estate with her brothers and sisters. That wasn't so long ago. I was in high school. When you think about the societal piece, which is really interesting, women do want to be taken care of, and men want to take care of women as well. So you've got this societal thing going on. And last but not least, you have sort of this competence bias, you have confidence issues, and women just feel, I think, inadequate sometimes. And it's not because they can't be confident, it's that they need to be shown how to be confident.
Well, I think that's a great point. It's one of the reasons I'm so pleased we're talking about this morning, because I must say, in my own life, I grew up in a household where my father did everything, my mother didn't have any involvement in finance, and so I basically imbued this kind of Prince Charming idea that somehow some guy was going to ride to the rescue and pay for everything. And life has been a shock. I'm now separated, and I've had to learn the hard way. But Carmen, my story is not unusual, is it?
No, I mean, I'm here because of abdication, really. I mean, partially because I grew up in a household watching my mother, who, by the way, fled a revolution, Dominicana, Latina. She had 6 children. I'm the oldest of 5 girls. And I watched our father hand a check to her every week for all of her expenses, the household expenses. And in that moment, in that transfer of power, it wasn't so much the power. I didn't judge her. I didn't think she was less than. But what I saw was, it doesn't matter where you get your money. If you have 6 kids and you need to stay home, stay home. But here's what really shocked me. 2 things. 1, he handed the check. Silence. No dialogue. No conversation. No questioning, right? And then we're talking about emotions and money. Resignation. The resignation on her face, in the fact that she was a very intelligent, vibrant woman who was in this position, who, by the way, then raised me as a raging feminist, but really, sit there and took the position that she was in and had to take it. But she made sure her children didn't. But to your point about, access to tools, too, in our lifetime, in my lifetime, women couldn't have credit cards. So one of the things that we need to do, we see my mother's position, we see ourselves now, is that now our emotions and our psychology and our motivation has to keep up and catch up with the fact that we have access to all the same tools, all the same information as the men do, and all the same markets. So we need to catch up with that.
And I think you raise a great point there, because I think the reality is, girlfriends, that actually these days it's often easier to talk about sex than it is to talk about money with our friends.
Absolutely.
I mean, how many of you have sat around and had a heart-to-heart with your friends about what's going on inside your bank account? I mean, it's scary.
Yeah, I do, but...
Laura, you see the fallout of this. I mean, how often do you see women coming into the office who seem to have been empowered, but actually turn up and say, I have no idea what's happening in our finances?
Very often. It happens all the time. I work in Southern California. We have a lot of entertainment industry families, and these women who have been, Mrs. Studio Head or Mrs. Executive Producer or Mrs. Movie Star, every restaurant is open to them, every Neiman Marcus, every department store, and yet when they come in, they say, I don't even have a credit card that's in my own name, I just use his. Or I have no access to our bank accounts because our money managers have always done these. These are wealthy, sophisticated women. And then we have the flip side, which is happening quite a bit more these days, which is women who are actually the earning spouses. And as Paula said, they've let somebody else take care of their finances, particularly if their spouse is a stay-home dad. Oftentimes he will say, well, let me take care of that. And so they don't even know what's going on. So in both situations, as we've seen, there is a lack of communication, lack of talking about it, and that lack of communication, not only amongst us as women with friends, but with our partners and spouses, causes a huge problem, which is something I think as women we have to avoid in our relationships. As early as the time you move in with somebody, I think it's important to start having those not very sexy conversations, but it is interesting that this is a topic that's so uncomfortable for so many of us.
I mean, do you tell people to basically start talking about this up front, before or early on in dating? I mean,
yes. I don't know how so much in dating, but again, these days, the way we date, you meet online, so you may not know exactly somebody's background, down to the who pays for that first dinner. Mm-hmm. But I do talk to people all the time, speak to many groups of women about prenuptial agreements, for example. And again, even if you aren't in a situation where a prenuptial agreement is right for you and your fiance because the law doesn't necessitate it or there's not enough money, have the conversations that you would be having if you were going to be having a prenuptial agreement. Hey, I'm 35. I don't ever want to sleep on a futon again. If we go to New York to travel, let's stay at a hotel. Or, hey, what time were you thinking that we might want to be retiring? How much should we put aside for our kids' education? When my older parents come to live with us because they can't live alone, are they going to be living with us or are they going to be living in some kind of an assisted living? Those are the conversations, again, not at all sexy, but certainly worth having, and they wouldn't be in a prenuptial agreement. A prenuptial agreement is this is what I earn and I'd like to keep it separate. You may not need that, but you do, I think, need to have conversations about finances so that you can be on the same page when you enter into what is an agreement to live together, to get married, to have children. Those are important topics to discuss.
So, I mean, Carmen or Paula, do you see the younger generation doing that more now? I mean, clearly the older generation, people like myself have been very slow to this game, but are we seeing any change of attitudes?
I mean, I'm seeing some, but when I do a lot of speaking around the country and I speak a lot to young women, I still see and hear a lot of, it's our money now. You've heard this one so many times, especially when you get married. It's our money now, and I just I'm on fire. Flames are coming out of my head. And then I'm not anti-coupling up or love or relationships, but let's be clear. Though I have been divorced twice.
That shows you're optimistic. You keep trying.
Hey, you can't be good at everything, okay? But you have to really understand your own autonomy. I think what I see is a psychology and an emotional state where we seem to have been brought up to internalize the idea that our gender has no business in the business, that we are just not there. And it's something that I see, as a woman of color, I see this in all the other realms of my life too, that this is not our place, that you shouldn't be putting yourself there. Girls, stick to what you do. So we need to stop internalizing that. This is not genetic, the idea that you can be in the markets or not in the markets, or you can't manage the money. What I would love to see is if you say, well, this is now our money. You need to have your money, and you need to know where all that money is going. And one of the things we have to realize is that we fight for so many things in equality. This is equality. Those conversations. That's all about equality.
And
money is
Carmen,
power.
What I find is that in the study, and what's shocking to me, because I made my team go back and look at the data 10 times, is that millennial women are abdicating more than any other generation, which is shocking.
Really?
It's shocking.
So you mean millennial women are basically saying, I'm going to let my Prince Charming...
I'm going to abdicate. Now, I don't think it's so much the Prince Charming. It could be various reasons why people abdicate. It could be the fact that they saw their mother do it. There's a lot of reasons why. It's not so much Prince Charming, but it is a phenomenon. It is happening. And I think that we have to break the cycle. Women have to realize that they have to do it themselves. They can delegate to a financial services person, they can delegate to their accountant or their attorney, but the truth is you still have to know certain things. And I think that financial wherewithal, people get a little bit confused about it, and I like what Laura said, because it's not just the market, the risk tolerance, your asset allocation. Katie Couric and I were talking backstage, she says her eyes glaze over for that, and I understand that. But what I think is really important is understanding your broader financial life, which is how much money can I spend? What's my debt? How much do I need to retire? If I might live to be 100 as a female, do I have long-term care? What about my charities and philanthropy and my taxes? I mean, it's a much bigger picture than just the market. And that's what's critical, because that's what women have to empower themselves to see the big picture. And that's really what financial empowerment and financial services, we need to get to that conversation, not to the markets going up and down today. Oh my God, we got volatility. Well, guess what? Volatility is here to stay. It's always going to be there. We're always going to watch the markets go up and down. But you need the peace of mind because it's much broader than investments. And that's the message that women need to hear.
Yeah, this is so important because, I didn't get into personal finance because Roth IRAs are riveting. I got into it because I, watched my dad, with the little money that we had saved up in retirement, watch Wall Street Week and look at stocks. And I said, well, this is interesting, and it's unintimidating because I just hung around and paid attention. But I'll tell you this, when you say bigger than the markets, what I realized at a very young age, and why when I got into it, I was on fire about it, was because money and how you manage your money changes your life completely. It's one of the biggest powers you have. It's like food, water, sleep, sex, money. That's it. So we need to pay it. We need
came before money.
Right?
Well, money can be sexy.
Right, but you need to pay attention because it affects every part of your life, whether it's divorce or relationships or parents. and dealing with your family. When you educate women in your family, when you leave here and when you have this knowledge, you can infect your whole family. You can change that whole ecosystem. My mother was very proud, and she didn't speak to us about her money or finances or a lot of other things, or her health, right? She was very old school. She didn't tell us that she lost her health insurance. She didn't tell us that she didn't feel well. Next thing you know, she's in the emergency room, stage 4 colon cancer. And I said, Mom, why didn't you go to the doctor? Why didn't you do something? I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have the money. 6 children. Don't you think we would have done that? Not money affects every single point of your life. You have to take control of it. You have to pay attention. Your lives depend on it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's a great, teachable, very tragic story, which I think we should all be taking to heart. And I often think that, if young women are willing to check what's in the food they put in their mouths, if they're willing to go to the doctor and have mammograms, they should be looking at money in the same way. If you care enough about your food, you should care enough about your money as well. But I'm curious, Laura, going back to what happens when it all goes horribly wrong. You have some glitzy, glamorous woman walking into your office who looks like she has it all. And you have had an amazing roster of clients from, Angelina Jolie, Kim Kardashian, and so on. She turns around and says, I've got no idea what's happening with my money. What do you do next? And how do you even pay for a divorce if you haven't got control of your money? Because, you're not cheap, are you? You're charging, what, $25,000 a retainer,
Well, okay, one of the actual pluses about getting divorced, and there may be a few, but when it does go horribly wrong, one thing that I do believe both parties end up learning about is their finances. You have to, because the state of California, at least where I practice, insists that you exchange information that you've signed under penalty of perjury about what you earn, what you spend, what you have, and what you owe. And so, and that happens on every level. People say to me, well, what's different about these glitzy celebrity divorces than the normal people? So we created a website this year called it'sovereasy.com that anybody can use and go on. And
that's a great name. It's over easy.
Thank you. But those are the 4 components of what you really need to do. And again, custody comes first when you're talking about children, and there's other things in terms of dividing up the estate. But you need to put into that program or discuss with your attorney what you have, what you owe, what you earn, and what you spend. And some people don't really even realize how much they spend. And I say, look, it's not going to be fun, but this will be interesting. For the next month, everything you spend, whether it's valet parking, to tipping the manicurist, to your mortgage, your homeowner's insurance, write it all down. We'll go through your credit card bills, we'll go through your checking account and figure out everything that you spend, then figure out what it is that you earn. And again, the good part of it is people who have been in relationships for many, many years and are never given access to this information because the person who's making the money is very old school, generally the man saying, you don't need to worry about that, I've got this, will now have access to that information because it's mandatory that it be disclosed. The state makes you disclose it. And in New York, that's the case as well. So full disclosure, when these women generally come to me and say, I'm so embarrassed, I have no idea what's going on with our finances, I say, this is the good news. You will never be in this position again. Anybody that's gotten divorced more than once and found themselves in that position the first time, sorry.
Yeah.
That does not happen a second time because this time you actually figure it out. You may not want to deal with it on a daily basis, but you know what you have, you know what you spend, you know what you need to budget, and that is a real learning experience. And for many women, it gives you the power to move on to the next chapter of your life.
I'm curious, Paula, do you see any difference between women in America or elsewhere or different parts of the country or demographics in terms of their attitudes towards this?
Yes, in fact, we have some early data that's very recent. We've done the survey, as you know, in the US, and we're doing this survey now globally. And I do believe that culturally we will see different things. I actually think there's parts of the globe, particularly, say, in Asia, where women are less, they don't abdicate as much as, say, the women in the US, which will be very fascinating. So we'll see more of that. But, I think at the end of the day, we have to really listen to the voices of these divorcees and these widows, because they have so much to say. They've been through so much emotionally, and that they want to have a voice. And I think that this discussion that we continue to have is very rational. But I think we have to bring in the emotional piece in it, because those are the people I think that can change the conversation if we listen. But I still think there's a lot of I coulda, shoulda, woulda. I'm sure you hear that all the time.
And we don't want to be put in that position. If you can prevent being put in that position. And you bring up a good point about the emotions. One of the things that I want to make sure that people understand, what we haven't spoken about, is men's assumptions and the system that we are in that assumes that we don't know, right? So when I hosted my CNBC show, I would have 4 guys usually next to me. And after the first segment, they would sit down and just, shake my hand and think I was just any other anchor. And they sit down, and after the first segment, every other time, the man would turn to me and go, "You're smart." And I'd be like, "Yeah." So, but the assumption is there. And then another guy would say every other week, "Are you really Hispanic?" Again, the assumption. So instead of internalizing that, which I think a lot of women do, and I'm not blaming you for it, this is the system that we are brought up in that says that you don't know, that you're not smart enough, this is not the place for you. Instead of internalizing it, I let it light me on fire.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think your point about, Laura's point about the fact that actually, once you've had this experience of going through a divorce, you're never going to be so naive again. And I would imagine that anyone who's got daughters will make damn sure that they are very savvy. I mean, my own daughters are very, very clued up about money these days, and about jobs, and about having to be independent, because they've seen it and lived it in their own lives. But again, I'm very curious about this age dynamic here. And we're almost out of time, but before we finish, I'd like to end on one note, which perhaps is a little bit encouraging. The Women of the World actually did a survey before this event and asked people on an app the following question: do you find financial planning empowering or intimidating? And there's some good news, because actually 61% of the audience, 61% of people on the app said they found it empowering.
Good.
So either you lot are very savvy, or you knew what they were going to say already and had taken it to heart, or we may be seeing the beginning of a shift.
Yeah. No, I think at the end of the day, financial planning is definitely important, right? It is the key to weave all the things together that we talked about, because the plan is about all those things. It's about your net worth. It's about everything that's additive. And I actually think we all need professionals in our lives. If we're professionals, you need to seek out help. And I think having the right financial advisor that engages both husbands and wives are very important. If that balance is not one and the same, then I think you need to reconsider your financial advisor relationship, because I think it's critical that both men and women participate in that conversation. And I do think that don't be afraid of this. It should not be intimidating. I always like to tell women that there's a rational side and an emotional side to money, right? The emotional side is ask the questions about yourself. Who's important to you? What's important to you? What do you fear? And then talk about those things with your spouse. And then at the end of the day, it's the framework, whether it's Laura's framework. Carmen, I'm sure you have a framework. My framework is around liquidity, longevity, and legacy. Right. Liquidity, how much money do I need to live on? What's my cash flow? Right. What are my debts? It's the longevity piece. How long do I think I'm going to live? And how much money am I going to need to live out my life? And then my legacy, which is what do I want to give to charities? What do I want to give to my children? So it's simple.
Right. Well, as long as that 61% weren't lying in the audience, the 61% who said they found financial planning empowering, it seemed that there is reason for hope and progress. So best of luck to all of you in figuring this out and taking control. And thank you for helping to illuminate how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.